Joining us now, professor of marketing at the NYU Stern School of Business, our friend Scott Galloway. He also is co-host of the Raging Moderates podcast. Scott, so glad you're here to walk us through this this morning. Remember, it was just 4 years ago, about right now, that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, Meta, pulled Donald Trump's accounts down after the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And now you fast forward 4 years, Donald Trump threatening Mark Zuckerberg during the campaign. And it does look, just in the last few days, last couple of weeks, like full capitulation, giving Donald Trump exactly what he wants. What do you see in this move?
First off, good to be with you, Willie. I see that all CEOs in tech should stop using the term stakeholders and just go back to really the truth here and talk about shareholders. 4 years ago, the term was called moderation. Now it's being called censorship. And with this decision, the CEO of Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, gets kind of a twofer. He gets to placate, at least temporarily, the president who threatened to put him in jail for the rest of his life. And he gets to save maybe upwards of $5 billion, which is how much they spend on their safety and security department. And at a price earnings ratio of 30, that's potentially a $150 billion increase in market capitalization. Mark Zuckerberg owns 15% of the company. So you have what is effectively a get out of jail card potentially from someone who appears to be an oligarch threatening to put people in jail, and add $15 to $20 billion to his net worth. The greatest trade of 2024. It wasn't Bitcoin, it wasn't Nvidia. It was Elon Musk investing $250 million directly in the Trump campaign. And then when Trump won since the election, Elon Musk's worth has gone up $140 billion. So that's effectively, I believe, about a 56,000% return on investment. So we've gone full kleptocracy. We can never, in my opinion, wave our finger at Russia again when the president, the elected president, is taking public trust and public authority and weaponizing governments and doling out capital and market share and contracts and threatening to use regulatory action against the competitors who don't give money to his inaugural committee or don't kind of bend the knee. We are effectively in a kleptocracy. Russia is the role model. We are becoming more like Russia every day. That's where we are.
Hey, Scott, it's Sam Stein here. I looked at all these adjustments that Zuckerberg was announcing. Some of them I think were significant. Some I think were a bit overblown. For instance, they already have offices in Texas, but he made a big stink about moving the content moderation office to Texas. And then I saw Lina Khan on CNBC, who suggested that, there is an FTC suit that is going to be considered in the next couple months that looks at whether Meta is a monopoly on a social media network. And she said this is plainly Mark Zuckerberg trying to get a sweetheart deal from the FTC. Do you see it that way?
I think that's part of it. Also, the move to Texas not only pleases the conservative side of the aisle, which he's trying to do and has made several actions to try and come across as more conservative, it's the ultimate quiet firing. Because if you tell, rather than a series of bad press releases or uncomfortable all-hands meetings, if you just decide you're moving your safety and security team from California to Texas, you're naturally going to lose probably 30 to 50% of the employees. So this is again nothing about placating the Republican Party and saving money and adding shareholder value. And what is so shocking, just from a personal standpoint, what's the point of having all this money if you aren't at some point going to show some fidelity as a 40 or a 50-something-year-old man that has the wealth of the GDP of a Latin American nation to actually standing up and showing some fidelity to American values? Bezos has got the yacht. Tim Cook, Jensen Huang at NVIDIA is worth more than Intel or Boeing. At what point? When do the men show up here? When do the Americans show up here? So this is not only incredibly shocking but not disappointing from Trump, but where's the leadership? Where are the men that have such blessings and such prosperity from the rule of law and capitalism and competition? And we don't need more mergers and acquisitions. We need more breakups. One company owns 2/3 of all social media globally. Meta, one company has 93% of all share of all search. Google, and if you don't think every day we don't pay higher prices, one company has 50% of all e-commerce, Amazon. The percentage of revenues that have gone to Amazon from third-party retailers has gone up from 24 to 50%. Look at the rents that parents are paying on Facebook when 24% of teen girls are now addicted to Facebook. 6% of our teenagers are clinically addicted to drugs and alcohol. 24% are addicted to Instagram. And the number of teen girls self-harming has doubled. So if you want higher rents as a consumer, as a retailer, and as a parent, that's where we're headed.
You know, Scott, there's so much to discuss here. You've talked though for some time about how this entire system is rigged, and it is rigged against working Americans, and rigged for billionaires. And you've said also people like yourself who made a lot of money in the markets, been very successful, but the tax system is and again, this was, you've been saying this for years now. Talk about how this is accelerating. You talked about the Elon Musk example. Talk about how this is accelerating and how this, and I say this as a small government conservative, this is a threat to American capitalism. This is, we can look at a lot of different threats facing this country, but moving towards this sort of oligarchy with all of these monopolies. And I've always told the story, during COVID. Somebody called me up and said, "Hey, you need to invest in the stock market." I go, I don't really do that. I don't trust the stock market. I don't want. He goes, "Just invest in the monopolies." I go, "The monopolies?" He goes, "Yeah, Meta. Invest in Meta and Amazon and Microsoft." And he named 5 or 6. And they're, like you just said, they're monopolies. Lena Khan tried to break it up. And you seriously would have thought that Karl Marx was marching down, Wall Street. And you combine that combination that you're talking about with the fact that billionaires are getting richer and richer by the second, while screaming socialism. And what does that say about where American capitalism is going over the next 5-10 years?
I think it comes down to a basic question. What is America? And my kind of economic role model is Peter Drucker. I think an economy in America exists to create a robust middle class. The most ascendant countries over the last 20 years have been China and India. And it's one basic litmus test. How many people are you bringing into the middle class? The greatest innovation in history is not the iPhone or the semiconductor. It's the American middle class that beat back fascism in the middle of World War II, has financed and built the greatest innovations, whether it's radar, whether it's the internet, whether it's vaccines. The middle class in America is the greatest innovation in history. And people like to fall back into this right-wing notion that it's naturally self-healing. It's not. It's an accident in history. Typically throughout history, you have a small number of people who weaponize government. They're very talented. They aggregate power. They weaponize government, and they aggregate more and more spoils. And then the good news is it's self-correcting. This level of income inequality is usually self-correcting. The bad news is the means of self-correction are typically war, famine, or revolution. And if you want to talk about tax policy, the myth in tax policy is that the rich don't pay their taxes. That's just not true. The fulcrum is the following. There's super earners and super owners. The folks around your table are probably considered super earners. You make exceptional livings, but it's all current income reported on a W-2. And if you live in New Jersey or New York, you're probably paying 48 to 52% tax rates.
Right.
But if you're a super owner, I make my living starting and selling businesses. My last business, which was sold for $160 million, I'm very transparent about money. This gestalt or zeitgeist that people should not talk about money is nothing but an attempt to keep poor people down, because rich people talk about money all the time. It's important to be financially literate. The first $10 million from my $160 million sale was tax-free. My effective tax rate over the last 10 years has been 17%. The average tax rate on the wealthiest 25 Americans is 6%. Corporate tax rates are at their lowest point since 1939. At the same time, taxes have gone up or the super owners. Now, the bottom 50% don't pay much federal income tax, but they pay a lot in usage and consumption taxes. But this misdirect talking about tax rates misses the point. It's the tax code, which has gone from 400 pages to 4,000. And that 3,600 pages, quite frankly, is there to screw the middle class and continue to transfer more money to the super wealthy. The fastest growing demographic group in America is not seniors. It's not Latins. It's billionaires. We had 500 billionaires 10 years ago. We now have 2,500. So if you want to cram more and more wealth into a smaller group of people, we're on our way. And the weird thing about America is that we support it because our superpower is our optimism. The Achilles heel is that 99%, the bottom 99% who are getting screwed, don't mind these policies because they believe at some point they're going to be in that 1%. But where are we? We're in a country that's had unprecedented prosperity, but similar to the way William Gibson described the future, it has not been evenly distributed. When 40% of U.S. households are struggling with some sort of medical or dental debt, when a quarter or 20% of households with kids are food insecure, and yet we have one man, Jensen Huang, and I like Jensen, who is now worth more than Boeing. I mean, something is wrong here. And just let me go to the psychology of happiness. I think a lot about happiness because I struggle with it, Joe. You effectively, once you get above a certain level of wealth, you get no incremental happiness. So why on earth would you not go back to a tax policy of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where say above, pick a big number, 10 million, you actually pay more than 10%, maybe more than 20%, maybe more than 50%, because the difference between 30,000 a year for a household and 50,000 is enormous to the well-being of that household. Low-income kids in low-income households have higher resting blood pressure, but the difference between making 10 million a year and 15 million a year offers you no happiness. But these individuals have weaponized government, and we risk revolution, whether it's CEOs being murdered in the street, whether it's a Me Too movement that had righteous components of it, or Black Lives Matter. What are these movements? They are targeting the wealthy. We are in the midst of a series of small revolutions to correct income inequality. And the reason we put an insurrectionist and a rapist in office is because for the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. Why? Because the majority of households are having the oxygen sucked out of the room, such that a small number of individuals and a small number of companies can be worth more than nation states. Income inequality is out of control. Our tax policy has gone full oligarch.
Scott, it's Ali Vitale. As you're thinking a lot about happiness, I often think about the forums in which Americans are having conversations about society and the political discourse. One of the first things that I thought about was the ways that Twitter used to be a place for that, to have a kind of healthier discussion about politics. It's, of course, become a silo now with the changes that Musk has made. But the same, I think, will also be true with Meta to the extent that it's not already. So what's the impact that this has on the political discourse writ large and the way that people from different sides of the aisle engage with each other? It's not just a physical divide in Washington, it's now online. You only see what you want to see. And how do these changes reinforce that?
My colleague at NYU, Jonathan Haidt, says to have a strong, thriving democracy, you need three things. You need trust in institutions. You need shared stories that we buy into, that we were the good guys in World War II, that Americans are a generous, righteous people, and that you have small social networks that develop social capital because we trust each other at our church. We trust our neighbors. And effectively, we've now gone into these hermetically sealed bubbles where, I mean, I affectionately refer to Twitter now as a Nazi porn bar. Do you know anybody that in our circle that trusts anything they read on Facebook? And 2/3 of Americans now, or somewhere between half and 2/3, depending on the age, now get their news from social media. And unfortunately, the organizations that actually do the hard and expensive work of fact checking, if I do an article and it's published on your website or on the CNN site or the Wall Street Journal, people call me and ask me for references such that people have some trust in what they learn. But we are all entering into these hermetically sealed bubbles that separate us, that polarize us from one another. And that not only has impact on our political discourse, It has impacts on things like household formation and mating. Young people are no longer dating because they don't like each other's political views. Do any of you remember the political views of the people you dated in your 20s? I don't. So you have these hermetically sealed bubbles, and it's not accidental that it's happening. And I know this sounds paranoid, but it doesn't mean I'm wrong. But if I controlled the largest media platform in history for 18 to 25-year-olds, that is TikTok, and I'm China, and I have a vested interest in diminishing the global strategic power of the U.S., and I can't beat them kinetically. I can't beat them militarily. I can't beat them economically. Why wouldn't I put my thumb on the scale of content that makes them hate each other? 40% more of Americans aren't speaking to their neighbors. A third of Americans think the election was stolen. 2/3 of Republicans. 1 in 4 Americans believe 9/11 was an inside job. We can beat anyone globally, anyone. Everyone would pray for our problems economically. We can add $250 billion to the market cap of the company 15 minutes post an earnings call. But here's the thing, we don't like each other because we've all been shoved into these algorithmically driven rage bubbles such that we've stopped getting along and we no longer have a shared truth. In sum, these algorithms that control our news, that now no longer have the cost or the expense of fact control or means of production or studios, are going to run away with it. And the few media institutions that actually had some fidelity to the truth and shared stories are, quite frankly, just becoming a shadow of themselves.
Yeah. You know, I was reading former President Jimmy Carter's speeches last night, and there's one in particular that warns of a moment just like this. Professor of Marketing at the NYU Stern School of Business, Scott Galloway, thank you very much. His latest book is entitled The Algebra of Wealth, a simple formula for financial security. A great conversation.